Hello, MGTOW brothers. It's been about a week since this Elliot Rodger rampage broke, and I decided now to weigh in with my opinion. There's been a lot of discussion about who he was and why he did what he did. Was he a misogynist? Was he a feminist? Was he an anti-feminist? Was he a red pillar? True force loneliness? Was he a blue pillar gone wrong? Was he a simp? What was he? Let's go ahead and put the cards on the table. Dude was crazy. Dude had serious Asperger syndrome. They said, how come he couldn't pick up women? Asperger syndrome is a high functioning form of autism. Sometimes they even mimic the signs of a sociopath. In fact, sometimes they call people with Asperger syndrome high functioning sociopaths. So they have the inability to connect with people. So if you can't connect with people, you can't connect with women. That was his problem. The dude was crazy. And I was reading all these articles, and I finally found one from Rick Sanchez of Fox News Latino. And it sums up everything, or most of everything, that I think about this particular story. So I'm going to read this, and at the end, I'm going to give my take on it, what I think. It may be something you agree with, or maybe something you disagree with. But I'm going to go ahead and read this into the record, and then I'll be back at the end, and I'll give you my take on this particular tragic situation. Cut the euphemisms. Santa Barbara shooter was crazy and belonged in asylum. We used to lock up crazy people. Then we stopped. We used to care for crazy people. Then we stopped. We used to call crazy people insane. Then we stopped. We used to call crazy people mentally ill. Then we stopped. Now we do next to nothing until they do something, like kill for reasons most of us could never even begin to fathom. Elliot Rodger was lonely. Elliot Rodger was desperately lonely. Elliot Rodger was isolated. Elliot Rodger was a murderer. He was sick, and we can sit there and blame it on class warfare, misogyny, alienation, guns. The real cause, not to be disrespectful to the dead, is the fact that Elliot Rodger was just plain crazy. There, I said it. Somebody has to. Since the dawn of time, there have been people who are, well, crazy. I know it sounds harsh, but the longer we sit around looking for euphemisms and explanations for their actions, the more people will die. It turns out that Rodger was on psychotropic drugs. What are psychotropic drugs? Basically, they are medicines that alter chemicals in the brain, which in turn affect mood and behavior. Some of the common side effects include, but are not limited to, suicidal tendencies, hallucinations, psychosis, and mania. Psychotropic drugs have become so commonplace, they've blended into our lexicon and may have been taken at one time or another by as many as half of all Americans. Psychotropic drugs have become so commonplace, they've blended into our lexicon and may have been taken at one time or another by as many as half of all Americans. Lithium and Prozac come to mind as immortalized by Gen Xers in the Nirvana song of the same name. Kurt Cobain describes crazy for millions of fans with the lyrics, "I'm so happy, 'cause today I found my friends. They're in my head." By the way, Kurt Cobain was a manic depressive drug user who shot and killed himself in the head 20 years ago. Which brings us back to Elliot Rodger. He too had a friend in his head, a friend who convinced him that women who didn't want to be with him needed to die. This past weekend, he went on a violent killing spree in and around the campus of the University of California, Santa Barbara due to his loneliness. He was a sad, sick young man who thought he was entitled to love, entitled to sex. Misunderstood? Actually, he was pretty easy to figure out. He was crazy. His mother told that to the police, but they didn't listen. Police chose to leave him alone. They didn't take his guns. They didn't see them. They didn't even take him away. Why? Because by law, they couldn't institutionalize him unless he'd already been institutionalized. The problem is we no longer institutionalize. Psychiatrists say getting somebody committed today is close to impossible. Long-term facilities are few and far apart, with waiting periods of up to a year. As for short-term interventions, they say insurance companies aren't willing to pay for hospital stays, thereby creating a revolving door where even the violently insane can pass through undetected. And therein lies the problem. We used to have a place for people who we thought were crazy. They were called insane asylums. Then in the 1960s and 1970s, we did away with them. We chose instead to treat them with antipsychotic drugs and manage them with short-term or outpatient care. Today, we're no longer allowed to call them insane. We're simply allowed to say they're ill, mentally ill. Gone are the places to put them. Gone are the institutions. Gone is the money to manage their care, long-term or short. So what are we left with? Crazy people, lots of them, and drugs, lots of them, and murders, lots of them. Is it unfair to suggest that all people who consume psychotropic drugs become violent criminals? Of course it is. So instead, let's consider this list of the most noteworthy violent offenders who were on psychotropic, beginning with the man who tried to kill a president. John Hinckley, 1981, attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. Also shot Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, and policeman Thomas Delanthe. Drug Valium. Lori Dan, 1988, shot up a second-grade classroom in Winnetka, Illinois, killing 1 and wounding 6. Drugs, anafranil and lithium. Patrick Purdy conducted a schoolyard shooting rampage in Stockton, California, murdered 5 children and wounded 30. Drugs, amitriptyline and thorazine. Joseph T. Westbecker, 1989, shot 20 workers at Standard Gravure Corp. in Louisville, Kentucky, killing 9. Drug Prozac. Kurt Danish, 1996, shot his own father to death in 1996 without knowing what happened. Drug Prozac. Michael Cornell, just 14 years old, shot up a high school prayer meeting in Paducah, Kentucky, killing 3, leaving another paralyzed. Drug Ritalin. Kip Kinkle, 15 years old, murdered his parents and went to school the next day where he killed 2 other classmates and wounded 22. Drugs Prozac and Ritalin. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, 1999, were behind the school shooting rampage in Columbine, Colorado, in which they killed 12 students and a teacher and wounded 24 others. Drug Luvox. Larry Gene Ashbrook, 1999, murdered 7 people and injured 7 at a Christian rock concert in Fort Worth, Texas. Drug Prozac. Michael McDermott, 2000, accused of gunning down 7 of his own co-workers at Wakefield Tech. Drugs, a trio of antidepressants. Christopher Pittman, 2001, 12 years old, murdered his grandparents. Drugs, Paxil and Zoloft. Andrea Yates, 2001, drowned all 5 of her children, ages 7 years down to 6 months, in a bathtub. Drug, Effexor. Jeff Weiss, 2005, 16 years old, on Minnesota's Red Lake Indian Reservation. Shot and killed 9 people and wounded 5 others. drugs, Prozac. Terry Michael Ratzman, 2005, killed 7 members of the Living Church of God before committing suicide. Drug, medication for Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Sung Hyu Cho, 2007, was the spree killer who killed 32 people and wounded 17 others at Virginia Tech. Drug, Prozac. Robert Hawkins, 2007, killed 8 people before turning a gun on himself and committing suicide. Drugs, Ritalin and Zoloft. Stephen Kazmierzak opened fire in a lecture hall in Northern Illinois University, killing 6, wounding 21. Drugs, Xanax and Ambien. Robert Stewart killed 8 people in a shooting at Pine Lake Health and Rehab Nursing Home in Carthage. Drugs, Lexapro, Ambien, Benadryl, and Xanax. Jared Lawfer shot former Representative Gabby Giffords, Democrat, Arizona, at an event she was holding at a Safeway. Drug, medications for schizophrenia. Edward Cincion entered an IHOP restaurant in Carson City, Nevada, and shot 12 people. 5 died, including 3 National Guard members. Drugs, he was taking an unknown drugs for mental issues. Scott Evan DeCarre entered a hair salon in Seal Beach, California, killed and fatally shot 6 women and 2 men. Drug, antipsychotics. Thomas T.J. Lane killed 3 students during a rampage at Chadron High School in Chadron, Ohio. 3 others were injured. Drugs, mix of prescription drugs with heroin. Ian Stawicki opened fire on a Cafe Racer Express in Seattle, killing 5 and himself after a citywide manhunt. Drugs, unknown medication for psychotic problems. James Holmes, dressed like the Joker, killed 12 people and wounded 58 during the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises in Aurora, Colorado. Drugs, 4 prescription medications including Vicodin. He was said to be hooked on it. Andrew Engeldinger, 2012, shot 5 to death at Accent Signage Systems in Minneapolis, Minnesota. 3 others were wounded. Drugs, mirtazapine, trazodone, clonazepam, and Wellbutrin. Adam Lanza, 2012, shot and killed 27 people, including 18 children, at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newton, Colorado. Drug, Fanap. There was a lot to digest. And so we find out that Elliot Rodger was indeed probably insane. You know, his mother and father raced to Santa Barbara, didn't get there in time to try to stop him from shooting all these people. They knew that he had gone off the deep end. That wasn't in doubt. But there's a take on this, not article, but this whole situation that people aren't recognizing. And who's to blame? Feminists. Why are they to blame? Is because the way they treat little boys, not necessarily men, but little boys, and how they raise them. You know, the model since the 1970s of what a child was supposed to act like was a little girl. And they totally excluded the needs of little boys. You know, they started cutting out, in high school, they started cutting out the manual arts, where boys actually built something and did something. Then they started cutting out physical education. And then they started cutting out recesses. And then they started cutting out the games that little boys like to play. And there was no room in the classroom to be a little boy. So they tried to shoehorn these little boys into the factory farms we called the classroom in schools. And when the little boy didn't conform to him being a little girl, which he wasn't, which he had no possibility of being, they tried to stuff his gullet with these drugs, with these psychotropic drugs, so that he would zone out and he could be controlled, and he would act more feminized, like a little girl, like their model of what they thought a little boy was. They thought little 5 and 6 year olds were dangerous because he may have liked a little girl and kissed her on the cheek. All of a sudden, he was a potential rapist, or he was a potential sex offender. That's why little boys, after the age of 10 years old, grades start to go down. That's why little boys start dropping out of high school, because that institution doesn't serve them anymore. They can't be little girls. They can't be cute little feminists. And they can't stand the way the drugs make them feel because it's not in their nature to act like that. So what happens? What do you think happens, America? This society creates these live hand grenades. These frustrated little boys who can't grow up to be men, forced to conform into a feminist ideal that their biology says they can't be. So to control these little hand grenades that you have in your schools, you put a pin in them, call these Ritalin or Prozac or all these other alphabet soup of psychotropic drugs, trying to control them. And then after they grow up, you continue to stick those pins in them so that they won't go off. So is it any wonder that every now and then a pin will drop out and that little hand grenade will go off and either hurt himself or hurt other people? You can't raise little boys and men against their nature. Little boys were not meant to be females. They weren't meant to be women. They weren't meant to be feminist. They are what they are. And we do ourselves and our country and our society a disservice by trying to make them into something that they're not. And as feminism gets worse and worse and worse, you see these stories that used to be so spread out and so sparingly become like a common event. It seems like every 6 months, some young kid who's on Ritalin or on one of these other psychotropic drugs goes off and kills 4, 5, 6 people. I'm reading today down in Orange County in Southern California, where another kid on Ritalin, probably on Ritalin or one of these other alphabet soups that he's been stuffed with since he's probably about 5 or 6 years old. He goes off and kills his family, the mother, father, sister, and himself. Another hand grenade whose pin slipped and it blew up on our society. When are we going to wake up? When are we going to teach these little boys to be MGTOW? When are we going to teach these little boys that there's another option than this feminist model that they've been stuffed with and promoted and sold? We can't afford any more of these little hand grenades. We're going to have to go in and defuse these bombs. We're going to have to show these kids that there's other options other than the little path with a little bit in your mouth where you're a mule for some woman, or that you're a live body for your country to go over someplace in some godforsaken land to kill some other guy who's been fed the same thing. It's about time that we diffuse all these little hand grenades, because it's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse. And what do women do? Instead of solving the problem, instead of doing what's necessary, they do what they always do. They blame it on men. Oh, he's a misogynist. Oh, he's an anti-feminist. Oh, he hated women. Tell these feminists, get off your sorry ass and do something for a change. That's all I got to say.